start early? Do you? On what? Oh. All right, good afternoon and welcome to the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting for January 29th, 2018. Could we have the roll, please?
Tyler Robinson.
Here.
John Spring.
Here.
Andre Spinelli.
Here.
Danielle Bailey.
Here.
Mitzi Barker.
Here.
Brian Looney.
Here.
Jared Gardner.
Here.
Seth Anderson.
Here.
Greg Strike has been excused. Thank you.
Thank you and welcome to Seth. We have the minutes for Monday, January 8th, 2018. Is there a motion to approve those minutes? Thank you, Ms. Barker, seconded by Mr. Spring. Any objection to adopting those minutes? Hearing none, the minutes are adopted. Next up is disclosures. Jared?
None.
Danielle?
None.
Mr. Looney?
Yes, I'll be abstaining from voting on item D1, the consent agenda, because I was absent at the January 8th meeting.
Thanks, Brian. I have the same abstention on the resolution for approval as well. I will not be voting on that resolution. Mr. Spring?
I have none.
Andre?
None.
Mitzi?
Nothing.
And Seth?
Yes, I'll abstain from voting on the consent agenda. I wasn't on the commission yet, as well as case 2017-0118. I will recuse myself from that conversation as well.
Okay, very good. Thank you. So next up is the consent agenda. Can I have a motion to adopt the consent agenda? There's a little procedural deal we got to do here. Thank you, Mitzi. Can we get a second? Anyone wishing to pull items from the consent agenda? Jared, did I hear that you wanted to pull that item?
Yeah, if my understanding of the procedure is correct, then yes.
So let's pull Resolution 2018-001 related to case 2018-005. That leaves no other items for the consent agenda, so we'll move on to that Resolution 2018-001. Can I have a motion to approve that resolution? That's made by Jared and seconded by Ms. Bailey. Mr. Gardner, go ahead and speak to that motion.
Well, I have no objection with approving this resolution, but there were some changes that I thought needed to be made to conform to our discussion and vote from last week. So I don't know if I would need to, I guess, make another motion to amend.
Does that need to do it? So why don't you just, your main motion will be to approve the resolution as amended, and then let's get those amendments on the table. I don't think you need to make specific motions.
Yeah, just two minor changes. One would be in the finding of fact under A3, it says the use is compatible with the surrounding uses, which include a hospital, and it would be a change to say which include multifamily residential and commercial. And that's consistent with the recommendation we received, or the report from the planning commission, or I apologize, from staff that we received last week.
And striking the word hospital, correct?
Striking the word.
I don't believe there is a hospital near.
Correct. Yes.
Okay. Any objection to that change? Okay. Next.
And then the second would be in B3. It currently reads, the site shall have a site obscuring fence, and the recommended condition of approval from staff that we adopted last week was to read, a site shall have a minimum of a 4-foot tall site obscuring fence. So the addition would be the language minimum of a 4-foot tall.
And to be clear, that was as stated in the staff report, the original staff report, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So I see no reason to have any issue with that. Anyone else? So if that could you please vote on the motion to adopt the resolution as amended? The resolution is adopted. Thank you, Mr. Gardner. Catching that. Next up is under unfinished business, case 2017-118. This is case from the municipality of Anchorage, Heritage Land Bank, review and recommendation by the Planning and Zoning Commission to the Assembly for approval of an update to the Chugiak Eagle River Site-Specific Land Use Plan, comprehensive plan amendment to the Chugiak Eagle River Comprehensive Plan, and subsequent update to the Chugiak Eagle River Comprehensive Plan's land use plan map. The public hearing is closed, but we do have a update from the municipality. Mr. McLaughlin, do you want to take us through that submission?
Sure. The commission closed the public hearing and then requested postponement of the case in order to review the recommended changes that the commission had. The Heritage Land Bank went back to make the changes requested by the community and by the commission, and found that they had to dig a little deeper and go back to some, all the way through the document, or at least into chapters 7, 8, and 9 of the plan, in order to change the plan to reflect the community's desire about returning the total number of dwelling units within the plan to the numbers from the original 2010 plan, and also to include a 25 to 30 space parking lot for access to Chugiak State Park, and the AWU water tank site. So they asked for a little bit more time, so that's why you didn't hear it at the last meeting, and you're hearing it tonight. This is the HLB simply made amendments to the plan shown in track changes to reflect the community's desire expressed, and also what the commission expressed during their discussion. If you have specific questions, you could ask me. Also, representatives from the Heritage Land Bank are here to speak to any confusion that I may have created by what I've said. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Mr. McLaughlin. And any questions of staff on either planning staff or Heritage Land Bank staff on what has been presented to us, the supplemental information?
Supplemental? Just,
Well, the case in addition to the supplemental information that was provided for you here this evening.
yes, I have a question.
Go ahead, and then Mr.
It
Lee.
might be, but I don't know who could answer it best, but so the new plan has the same number of housing units as the old plan. It appears, though, that there's a change in the density from the old plan to the new plan. The new plan, the revision of your new plan, calls for a density range of 7 to 15 dwellings per acre in track 1, I believe. And that's the one I'm concerned with, I think, mostly. And I didn't have the old plan available to really look at very intensely, but I think the old plan in 2010 had the same number of dwelling units, but I think the densities were different. I think the density, it had a section or a tract that had what was called medium residential density, and then it had something called low medium density. And I don't believe that both of those were 7 to 15 dwelling units per acre. I think it was more 7 to 10 dwelling units per acre in the old plan. Is that correct? I'm having trouble trying to put them together, but has the density, changed? It wasn't part of our recommendation, mind you. Our recommendation was just to keep keep the total number the same. We didn't say anything about the density, but I think we might have implied that the density should not rise. Did it, in fact, go up, the density in the new plan?
Mr. Spring, through the chair, if you recall from the 2010 plan, we had development pods, and they had different ranging densities, and each of those pods had a cap. So we got rid of the different segments of Tract 1 and created just one large Tract 1. The zoning recommendations in the 2010 plan and this plan that's before you are the same, R2M, and it would have a cap of 115 units on Tract 1, which is largely the same as what was in the 2010 plan.
So, if I may,
Go
so
ahead.
the original plan had a R2M recommendation,
Correct.
and the density for all those tracks. I'm sorry. Density for all those tracks was 7 to 15.
No, they varied.
They varied. So some of them were, in fact, are higher now than they were in the original plan.
We didn't differentiate into different subcomponents of Tract 1. We lumped it into all one
Yes,
Tract 1.
but in fact, though, the ones that were lower, there were several tracks that were lower density than 7 to 15.
Ultimately, the number of dwelling units would be the 150.
Well, it's not the dwelling units. I'm just
Oh.
I'm just trying to work through whether or not the changes in this plan would allow more high density dwelling unit types, like an apartment instead of a single family. That's what I'm trying to get at. The density, you followed the direction perfectly on the density. I mean, on the total number. It's just that I'm just curious whether, if we approve this, if we're approving the building of a different assortment of housing types that was is different from the original plan.
Unless the Title 21 changed from an R2M in 2010 to 2017, I don't believe that there will be any different housing types than what would have been expected with the approval of the 2010 plan with the R2M zoning recommendation.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Looney, go ahead. Nicole, can you state your full name for the record, please?
Yes, Nicole Jones-Vogel.
Thanks. Mr. Looney, go ahead.
And I'm not really sure if the question is for you, Nicole, or for Francis. Really, I'm just trying to get some background on the public process from this revised or supplementary information we have in front of us today. How has this been shared with the public to this point, and what's been the reception so far?
Mr. Looney, through the chair, we posted this on our municipal website. It was mailed out to all the community council presidents and the list of folks who testified at the last Planning and Zoning Commission meeting.
And generally in support, or
We have not received any comments to date.
I guess we'll find out. Okay, thank you.
Well, we won't necessarily find out. The public hearing's closed right now unless there's a different will of this body. So I'm gonna follow up with the line of questioning that Mr. Spring was going down. The current plan, and there was a section A, B, C, D, and E, right?
Correct.
Before the amendment that we saw last month. The A is the area over, shall we say, more, off of, closer to Menden Hall, closer to the existing neighborhood, correct?
Thank you. Correct. It's the low-density portion that includes the AWW water reservoir.
Right, so a portion of that has now been sort of identified for AWW use, and then the remainder of that portion is now combined with the entire rest of that sort of lower down site, so that it's all one tract. Is that right?
It remains Tract 2. AWW portion is now Tract 4. And then you have the green belt, the open space area, and then everything north of the open space area is now Tract 1.
So,
Previously was C and D.
so okay, but it is a separate Tract 2. The divider between Tract 2 and Tract 1 is where?
It's roughly at the parking lot entrance of the Harry McDonald Center.
At the parking lot. So the difference, that in that tract 2 has a density range and a total unit count of what?
7 units total. And
7 total units in the tract 2?
correct. And this is, the Appendix E should show the map that we're talking about, and then page 37 has a breakdown of what's in each tract. So tract 2 is a 1 to 2 DUA with a total unit of 7 dwelling units.
7 dwelling units with an approximate split somewhere past the Harry McDonald Center.
Correct. If you look on Appendix E, the map shows the boundary of tract 2.
So one could suggest that there's a little bit of a difference here in that the tract 1 and tract 2 are adjacent to one another, or the quote-unquote medium density of tract 1 has gotten to the Harry McDonald Center, correct?
Correct.
Okay. I think that's
Could I
kind of
follow
what
up on
you,
that-
please
that
do.
Same chart on 37, I think, or page 8 on our, it's table 9, right, you were talking about? That table compares the 2010 plan with the 2016 update and the revised plan that you just made. And like the chair was saying, originally it was sections C and D, I think, were the higher density on the kind of the northwest part of the track, right? And if I read this right, it looks like C and D, going down the column there, it says density ranged from 3 to 6 dwelling units per acre to 7 to 10 dwelling units per acre in the original plan. Now, is that true? Is that what the original density was?
That's correct.
So 3 to 6 is not RM,
The zoning recommendation in the 2010 plan was R2M for both
but that's
C
not
and D.
density. You can't do R2M with 3 to 6. That's a single-family zoning district. I think whoever wrote that was wrong because it couldn't be a R2M at the 3 to 6 dwelling units per acre.
I think they were looking at gross densities.
Well,
I mean, I think that's how I understood it when
That's
the
not
plan
usually-
was done.
usually when I see a land use plan that says 3 to 6 dwelling units per acre, it's single-family. I've never seen any land use map that had 3 to 6 that wasn't single-family. And 7 to 10, well, that's definitely not the range that R2M should be. It should be 7 to 15 for R2M. So I guess my statement still holds that I do think there's been a change in the housing types that are allowed from the old plan to the new plan. And I don't see where I'm off here, but I'm not necessarily against that. I just wanted to clarify. I just want to make sure that people understand that that's the case. I'm not going to vote against it based on that. I just want to clarify it so we know what we're doing.
Right, and our intent was to carry forward the zoning recommendations in the 2010 plan, which is why we got to R2M.
Any other questions for staff? Ms. Barker, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't see on the map, I'm looking at the one on the back of the Appendix C, where the parking area for Chugach State Park has been carved out. Did I miss that?
Through the chair, Ms. Barker, it's a text edition, but it's not reflected as a P on the map.
Can you point me to it in the text? It's fine print.
excuse me, Ms. Barker through the chair, the Appendix E does not have that. The Appendix E is the reference to the map that you saw at the December meeting. It is within the body of the text amendments, which I'm trying to find the page that is on. I think it's like page 33. And you should find it in the legend. It's the second to last sentence in the legend on page 33.
I guess I was looking for it in the update here.
If you look at page 45, there is text referencing a parking area, a medium-sized parking area of 25 to 30 spaces.
Yeah, I just want to know where it's going to go. Why isn't it on the map? Yes,
The
my-
property hasn't been subdivided yet.
No, I understand the technicalities of it, but if I'm a resident there and I'm looking at this, I can see where you've kind of changed around how the tracks are going to be, but that's a piece that I know the community was very interested in seeing, and it's not visual as to where you would even propose to do it. I mean, as long as we're talking about, density versus gross number of dwelling units, I think it's appropriate to ask where you would plan to where would you plan to locate that parking? We had discussed, I think, having it kind of at the end of the parking lot of the McDonald Center, so it would be somewhat adjacent to that existing parking area.
Mr. McLaughlin, is that something that would come up during the plating process or during the development process?
Well, so this property has to be rezoned, subdivided, major site plan review. And there's 2 bullet points here. One that says this plan also includes recommendation for a medium-sized parking area, 25 to 30 spaces somewhere on the parcel. The parking area may be located adjacent to the McDonald Drive, another existing road with access to the parcel, or within the newly developed neighborhood in Tract 1 and 2. The location of the parking area will be determined during the subdivision process. And then ensure that the proposed parking area is appropriately located and connected to existing and new trails within the open space area. They've handled it with the text and then in the legend to the map, but they haven't put a P on the map.
Thank you, Mr. McLaughlin. Ms. Barker, anything else on that? No? Okay. Any other questions before I bring us to the motion? Anybody else? Okay, this case was postponed from the December 11th meeting. We have a motion on the table that was made by Mr. Spring to recommend approval of the staff recommendation regarding the update of the site-specific land use plan for Heritage Land Bank parcels, and that was seconded by Mr. Looney. So that is what is on the table, and I would just point out that motion clearly on December 11th represented the site-specific land use plan as it was submitted for the December 11th meeting. It does not reflect this supplemental information or amendment. But that is our motion on the table. And Mr. Spring, since this is your motion, I'm gonna bring it back to you.
Thank you very much. Should I withdraw the motion and propose a new motion or amend the motion?
I think you can amend it. I think you can do either.
Okay. I'd like to amend the original motion, and state that Planning Zoning Commission recommends approval of the amended land use plan for Carroll Creek parcel dated January 29th, 2018. And I don't believe there's been any recommendations for any changes from staff, so that will stand, I think.
So it's the site-specific land use plan as amended vis-a-vis the memorandum dated January 29th that we have in front of us. Is that correct?
That's correct. Thank you.
Thank you for that motion. Is there a second to that motion to amend the main motion? Seconded by Ms. Bailey. Would you like to speak to that motion?
Yeah, we heard quite a bit of testimony last time from the, sorry, are you okay?
Sorry. Yeah.
Is it coming in? I got it. Quite a bit of testimony from neighbors who live close to this parcel. I think the commission tried to respond to their concerns regarding the increase in density and the impacts on the surrounding neighborhoods and the road system in particular. And our recommendation was to retain the total number of dwelling unit cap that the 2010 plan permitted. And staff and Heritage Land Bank has done a good job to come back with the revision that specifically meets that concern of the commission.
Anyone else wishing to speak to the amended motion? I'm going to support the motion. I believe the main impetus for this amendment was to allow for the development of the AWU facility. We heard in testimony, I don't believe I heard anyone testify that that was not a desired part or a necessary part of public infrastructure. We also heard in public testimony the desire for a parking lot to access the open space and potentially Chugach State Park. This plan, the main opposition that we heard was the notion to increase the density up over 300. I think what this does is brings the total number of units down to the number of the non-amended site plan. It does provide the flexibility to put those units in a larger tract rather than dictating these smaller areas. But with that, I believe that we've listened to what we heard, and I would suggest also that this action moves, once adopted or recommended, to the Assembly for an additional public hearing, an additional opportunity for the public to weigh in on that decision. Anyone else wishing to speak to the motion? Please vote. The plan is approved. What I would also ask for is a motion that that this plan, just because it wasn't clear in the main motion, that this plan adopt this action adopt the comprehensive plan, that be considered a comprehensive plan amendment to the Chugach Eagle River Comprehensive Plan and update to the Chugach Eagle River Comprehensive Plan's land use plan map. So we've adopted the land use study, but I'd like to clarify that we'd like this land use study to update the comp plan and the land use plan map. Mr. Spring.
Yes, I move that the Chugach Eagle River comp plan and land use map be updated to reflect the recommendations contained in the site-specific plan.
Thank you, Mr. Spring. That's seconded by Ms. Barker. Would you like to speak to that or provide findings to that?
No, I think this is very consistent. It's important to make sure that all plans are consistent with the comprehensive plan, and this is just more or less a housekeeping exercise, I think, in that respect.
Very good. Anyone else? Please vote on the motion. The motion is approved. So with that, if those of you that were here for that item, it takes a couple of weeks to basically show up on the Assembly's agenda. It will be introduced, and then 2 weeks later, there'll be an opportunity at that meeting for public hearing. So you'll have that opportunity, and hopefully there's a way that Heritage Land Bank or staff can sort of keep you apprised for when that shows up, so you're aware of that opportunity. So with that, thank you for coming down again, and good luck moving forward. Next up is case 2018-13. This is also Municipality of Anchorage, request to rezone Tract 1 on Tudor Road from PLI to B3SL. There's a memo in our packet to postpone. Could I have a motion to postpone this case? Ms. Bailey? Is there a specific date on there? I can't remember. So your motion is to postpone to February 5th, seconded by Ms. Barker. Any objection to that motion? Hearing none, we will take up that rezoning and public hearing next week. That leaves appearance requests. Mr. Oliva, you have 5 minutes. Once you come up and introduce yourself, we'll put the timer on, and I think you'll note when it changes color, it lets you know you got a minute left.
Good evening. My name is Ron Oliva. I'm owner, broker, auctioneer for Grubstake Auction. I own quite a few parcels in the vicinity and adjacent to the Brother Francis shelter. I'm here tonight, kind of like today's article about chickens. Believe it or not, it said a fight between Anchorage neighbors over chicken noise leads city officials to re-examine the laws. Unbelievable, because I'm here for you to re-examine the conditional use of the Brother Francis shelter. And the reason I'm here is because of the negative effect of health, safety, quiet enjoyment, and economic interference. It originated here at Planning and Zoning with restrictions, but they complied after found out that they were in non-compliance, and it took 7 years to bring it up to speed, then another 5 years. And so finally, they had a non-consent agenda item in which I could not appear, nor the public. I had sued them and was successful. They gave me $30,000, 10 from Beans, 10 from the shelter, and 10 from the Muni. I didn't want to sue myself, but I went back to the assembly and I said, here's the money. Take it back, get a medic, get a security guard, and get commercial garbage pickup. Guess how many people showed up for the $30,000? Goose egg. They marginalized me and thought they could buy me off. But in 2016, that area had over 8,000 calls. 2017 had 7,200 calls by mid-August. Now, if anything's a definition of a public nuisance, it would be that location. Code enforcement, if I said they violated, code enforcement cannot go down to the shelter because they don't carry guns or breast protectors. They turn it over to the police. Now, there's been 2 murders. 2 of my employees got killed. There's overdoses, rape, sexual, both male and female, filmed. A woman having oral sex performed on her, and they sent it to the assembly. I'm going, why would you film it? That's pornography. But it was disgraceful. You have disease, tuberculosis, MRSA, STDs are at an all-time high, AIDS, hepatitis. It couldn't get any worse with the fecal material, and you have Kids Kitchen in the neighborhood that they use volunteers from the street, but you can't wash down that fecal material and vomit because it freezes. But the overflow now, which was granted by municipal, they get another 75 to 100. We give them a lease for $1 a year. we now have to pay Beans $8,000 a year to handle the overflow. Additional impact, not an amendment to the conditional use. So it just seems like they're reviewing the lease, which there's a violation because it had a hold harmless cost that Beans and the Brother Francis should have paid back the municipality the $10,000. They never did it. And what the commission giveth, the commission can take away. That's what the chairman told us when they went ahead and granted this, and there were 3 remaining items. One, they had a map to pick up the garbage, and I would throw up to think that they ever fulfilled that, because 167 tons was picked up by Parks and Rec, most of it in that location. The other thing was a crosswalk. Oh, if there's ever a death trap, you can't get across those intersections sober, but they're drunk and on drugs. Why would you ever do anything? In the last 35 years, they did nothing. And then they were supposed to report back to this commission every 2 years, but they had that lifted. And the way they had it lifted was that non-consent agenda item by going to the Fairview Community Council and the neighborhoods and said we didn't hear anything negative. Believe me, when an adjacent property owner sues you for health, safety, economic interference, and quiet enjoyment, I think that's germane to a message of being a negative impact from the overflow. So this has affected me, stressed me out. They think I'm a loose cannon, but I'm actually pretty calm, except this is wrong. Injustice for one is injustice for all. I want you to review this, and Francis will basically bring you up to speed that this is a terrible, terrible situation. Both of those places should be shut down. I'm open to questions, believe me, after being in Alaska 44 years and next to the shelter for almost 40, I can answer any question you got. I didn't create the universe, but I can explain it.
Thank you, Mr. Leva. Any questions for Mr. Leva or for staff on this one? Go ahead, John.
Yeah, actually, I like, I guess, I think you've probably, staff has done this before, but I would appreciate it if you could pull the conditional use for the Brother Francis Shelter, and if there's another one for Beans Cafe, I don't know if there is, so we could take a look at the conditions of approval, or maybe you could review the conditions of approval once again to see if it complies.
Through the chair, Mr. Spring, I reviewed the conditional use conditions of approval, and I checked with land use enforcement, who's responsible for investigating complaints and violations in the conditional use. They and we find that the Brother Francis Shelter is complying with their conditional use approval, and the commission doesn't have the ability to reopen the conditional use. It was approved many years ago. Once it's approved, you can't get a second bite of the apple and decide that you want to add conditions. It becomes a code enforcement issue. Now, Brother Francis Shelter, Beans Cafe, Downtown Soup Kitchen, those are all sort of community-wide. They're bigger issues than what's here at the commission in this conditional use permit. The mayor's mobile intervention teams believe that they are making significant progress at improving the situation down there. But you know, at this point, the takeaway is the department is telling you that they're in compliance with their conditional use approval and that there's nothing that the commission can do.
So just there's other people in the queue, but just, Mr. Leva, just so you know, we don't have the conditional use conditions in front of us. There's members here that were never part of those conversations, so it was a lot to take in for those not familiar. So just trying to get everybody kind of up to speed. But I'm going to go to Ms. Bailey, and I'll come back if it doesn't come up. But Ms. Bailey, go ahead.
Question for staff. You said that you reviewed the conditions of approval and you found them compliant. Would it be possible to get a copy of what those conditions are in the staff's analysis?
Of course, I can email you the resolution of approval tomorrow. I could photocopy it and hand it to you here. Sure.
Just to add into that, I think
Yeah, go ahead.
I think it would be helpful to see that I agree that we shouldn't be adding on new conditions post hoc. That's not how it was intended to be, but I think it's us doing our due diligence to verify that staff is doing their due diligence and just making sure that those conditions are being met to the standards that we believe they should be.
Mr. Spinelli.
I just wanted to include myself in the photocopy because I've had dealings with code enforcement before where I had gross disagreements with what they considered okay.
Francis, go ahead.
I think the takeaway is that one of the lessons the commission can learn from the situation that Mr. Aleva is dealing with is, to scrutinize an application that comes before you, because if the department is telling you now that once you grant approval subject to some conditions that you can't revisit those conditions, then you'd want to get it right the first time.
If someone doesn't believe that with code enforcement's take on something, so in other words, if code enforcement doesn't agree there's code violations or whatever, who's the arbiter of that? What's the recourse?
The administrative officer. If somebody makes a complaint to land use enforcement, then they can initiate a private investigation and forward their evidence to the administrative official. It's a meeting that I haven't been to, but there's essentially some sort of administrative judge. I think they meet in City Hall.
Have you done that, Ron?
I can't get past the code enforcement to take my complaint because it has to go to APD, and they're not qualified to enforce code. They're qualified.
You're not even getting.
Not even
the code enforcement
close.
is saying no. They're just not saying anything.
I have banker boxes full of correspondence, and that's the big circle jerk they put me on. And no one's come clean. And I'm about to sue them again for inverse condemnation because I appealed my taxes and they reduced my assessment by almost $800,000. So if you don't think it has a negative effect, it does, on my health. I have high sugar levels, low testosterone. They sent me to a shrink. I tried to go, but Medicare doesn't cover it. I wanted to go to anger management because I lose it when they worry about chickens, and then I got people being killed on my fence line, and I get a circle jerk. It just doesn't make sense. And I don't know what they're smoking on the assembly or the mayor, but hey, they have something in common with the chickens. And I think it's the size of their brain.
I'm sorry, but I didn't follow the whole. Where'd the chickens come from?
There was a big complaint.
Okay, I missed the article. All right, got it.
I ruffled some chicken feathers there. I'm not sure.
Okay, Danielle, are you back in?
Yeah, just one more question for staff. So kind of getting through the process, when the conditions are reviewed, in order for there to be administrative officer, private investigation, and then go to administrative law judge, does there first have to be something done by staff or by code enforcement that has not been done already?
I'll say two things. I don't know if this answers your question. The problems that are occurring with, people with mental health issues, the addiction, the crime, and all of that that's occurring in that area of downtown. This is not specifically caused by Brother Francis Shelter, okay? This is a community-wide issue, and it just stops there. So you can't pin, one should not pin Brother Francis Shelter, blame them for the issues that are occurring in our community. Now, when someone from the public has a complaint, a zoning code enforcement complaint, they make that complaint to land use enforcement, the hotline. It's a case is open, investigated, and either it's found to be a valid complaint or not. If it's valid, then the code enforcement officer goes out and speaks with the owner, sends letters, starts fining $300 a day. Now, when I spoke with land use enforcement, the head of that office, last week, in regards to Brother Francis Shelter, they said that they're in compliance with their conditional use approval. We haven't had any recent complaints. In the past, when they've had a complaint, they've driven down there and investigated and found the complaint not to be valid. And that's what I myself have driven the site, and I haven't found any violations of the conditional use either. Now, as far as Mr. Aleva's options, there's not a lot of good options. And he's exploring all avenues, complaints to the ombudsman, regular appearance requests in front of the assembly. The Real Estate Services Heritage Land Bank is in negotiations for the purchase of some property and has already purchased some property from Mr. Aleva. There's a whole, I'm not going to get into the can of worms here because it's beyond my pay grade.
But just so I understood Ms. Bailey's question, though, I know you were asking if you need a land use code enforcement determination before you can go to this administration. Procedurally, you need to have that, but you can't appeal it until you have the sort of determination, right?
Correct.
Could you get us the answer to that question, Francis?
The question is, can Mr. Aleva go to the administrative official?
Yeah, in the absence of a land use enforcement determination, because he's explained why that's not happened, what's his recourse? As it relates to the conditional use permit, I think clearly that's what this is. We know that it has to do with issues beyond one shelter and one property, but it's related to the action of conditional use.
In your code books, there's a chapter devoted to enforcement. I haven't read it recently, but it I will find it and point out that code section. It's chapter 13 of your code books. It's a short chapter. It sets out what land use enforcement does about filing a complaint. I can, reread the section and then email you what, if a complaint is made but code enforcement does not find that it's a valid complaint, what are the complainant's options after that? There's this private enforcement option, but it's only been utilized, I think, once that I know about.
Yeah, I can just tell you from my personal experience, when I've had code enforcement not agree with a determination that I thought was valid, my recourse was the ombudsman. That was the only place I went. Eventually, I got something out of the place.
The ombudsman really sent me here because that conditional use is so poorly worded. Francis couldn't interpret it. He says it's above his pay scale. It's a can of worms. It was falsely, it would be germane for the negative overflow that they would report that, and I would have came forward at a public hearing to say, I sued them. How much more negative could you get? How much more negative impact of 8,000 calls in 2016, 7,200, if any of you had property, and every day you would see, the police have to escort the first responders and the fire department, and the police have to go down there by twos. How do you think I feel next door? You see, so common sense would tell you that that's an attractive nuisance to crime, drug use. They're not holding them accountable. And Francis, my little fupa there, was not a professional observation that they're in compliance and say they did nothing wrong. That's an opinion, because long-term enabling has created that subculture. And they are abusive. They're really down-to-earth vermin, because they're just sucking the life out of me, but also the community, because there's no accountability. You have no strength. Code enforcement doesn't even go there. And the police, 8,000 calls, what did you get? So right now there's 4 officers down there, and they lost about 30 to 40% of the population because they're felons. They had a bicycle chop shop there all summer. What homeless person drives a $1,500 Cannondale or a $5,000 Diamondback? And the lice and the bed bugs, you can see it out there. I don't even take furniture as the auctioneer. I don't take it from the library. I throw it away because it's contaminated. And this is a real sad situation, but this is a wake-up call that you got to hold them accountable. And it's going to spread as a pandemic, and those people are going to kill the host. Now, if you agree they should continue on, put it in your backyard, and then you'll get a sense of how I feel. It's not a win-win situation. You can't communicate with them, whether it's the mayor's office or the homeless coordinator's salary package is $187,000. Beans Cafe, Lisa Sauter's about $150,000. They got a $2 million budget. No security guards, no commercial garbage pickup, and they don't even have a medic. And they're costing us millions of dollars. And the reason why I limp is I fell on my lot. And you have to remember, if I stroke out 3 minutes, I have a 70% chance of survival if Station 1 comes down. But all those paramedics were at the shelter in Beans. So I laid there with a broken hip, a broken femur, and waited for Station 4, 12 minutes. If it's your children or yourself, the state law mandates those paramedics can't leave. And they use those, the homeless use those as a free ride to the hospital. This is a terrible situation, but I have compassion, I have understanding, I hire these people, but hey, this has to come to an end. You gotta hold them accountable, and it's gonna be like the opiate epidemic. The doctor gives you something for pain, then he oversupplies it. And the same with the homeless. You give them a helping hand, 3 days of triage, hey, they come back, it's 30 days in and out. You give them a meal, you give them clothing, you give them medical. And the Housing First Project, hey, read the article in today's paper about Medicare. Soon as you house them, that cost isn't going to go away. They're shooting heroin in the bathroom at Brother Francis shelter. They're going to be more costly and more of a burden on the taxpayer.
Okay, I'm going to go to Danielle, and then we're going to wrap up because we're limited.
No, hey, I
to do here
appreciate
this
you
evening.
listening.
Ms.
It's the
Bailey.
most serious listening, and you heard me. But hey, what else can I do?
Yeah.
I just want to clarify before I say this, this isn't a question for staff or for our presenter. I want to thank our presenter for coming, and I'm interested in looking into the things related to the land use and the conditional use permit. However, I do take slight umbrage with the fact of an overgeneralization or calling community members vermin. I am concerned about the issues you present that relate to the land use, but as far as that overextends, I don't think that's something that is appropriate. But that is not something am not expecting a.
Don't be offended by that word. That's a dictionary definition.
I am looking forward to the conditional use permit, and I think Francis first work on that.
So to recap, a couple of commissioners have asked for the conditional use standards. If we could get those, Francis. Just one last clarification, Ron. You mentioned, did the ombudsman really tell you that your recourse was to go to the Planning and Zoning Commission?
Well, he said it was so poorly worded.
Was this recently? Was this a recent?
Yes, I have the correspondence. I don't know if I brought it with me, but Daryl Hassan, he's the previous homeless coordinator.
Yep.
And so he understood what has happened down there in those two agencies losing sight of their mission.
Okay. Thanks for coming. We're going to get this again, I think what Francis pointed out is we do not necessarily have the ability to unilaterally open up a conditional use permit or revoke it. We can make a recommendation, but we don't procedurally, that I understood, unless someone tells me differently, have the ability to do that.
Okay, but if it was gained under false pretenses, that's a negative effect. And this obviously is a negative effect. It's not an addition or an asset to the community having those number of calls.
Yeah, I don't want to mislead you to think that we are in the
Don't worry,
driver's
I've been
seat.
down this road. I'm not a piker.
Yeah.
And hey, I've been here 44 years and I ran for office, and I commend you for listening, but you have to understand this is a dangerous situation for the city. It's a dangerous situation for me, and you can have all the compassion in your hearts. And Miss Bailey, I hope you're not related to Glenn Bailey, but that's the downtown soup kitchen. Oh, worse. They're going to turn that place, Boardwalk condominiums, it'll be Baltic Avenue in 5 years. Trust me, there's no accountability. It's sad. Hey, thank you very much.
Yep.
I wish you all well, and come on down to Beans. I'll buy you lunch.
Miss Bailey, motion to adjourn. Can I get a second? Can I just hear a second? You get one? Second. All right. Meeting is adjourned. Thanks.